Hi, welcome to Defcon 3. I'm KT McFarland. The situation in Ukraine does not appear to be getting any less serious. In fact, in the last few days, it looks like it might threaten to boil up again. Joining me right now is Congressman Mike Pompeo. He's a Republican from Kansas. He's on the House Intelligence Committee, and most importantly, he just got back from Ukraine and Poland. So, Congressman Pompeo, thank you so much for joining us in person in New York.
Great to be here. Thank you.
What did you find when you were in Ukraine last week?
Well, it doesn't appear to be getting any better, just as you described it. The Russians continue to have tens of thousands of forces stacked along both the eastern boundary of Ukraine and the north, and show no signs, save for a token 100 folks or so, that they've moved back. The second thing I saw is a set of NATO forces, a group of folks who don't be prepared to do nearly enough to prevent Vladimir Putin from moving into the Ukraine. Just this weekend, we saw uprisings in the eastern Ukraine, protesters, Russian ethnic protesters, attempting to argue for a referendum. I'd be shocked if that was spontaneous. That showed the clear hand of the Russians in provoking these kind of protests to make this idea that it's okay for the Russians to move in to protect Russian ethnic interests. The same kind of things that permitted them to go into the Crimea are now being stirred up in eastern Ukraine as well. I think the risk over the last 10 or 15 days has actually increased rather than having decreased.
Okay, so let's play this forward. Let's say, as you said, the Russians have sort of sent in agent provocateurs, and they're heating up the situation so the Russians then have an excuse and a reason to go in to protect ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine. They move the tanks across the border. What should the American response be?
Well, sadly, I think it's going to be near nothing. We put on some modest sanctions to date. I'll be very surprised if we even put increased sanctions, even in the event that he rolls. I'll tell you what I heard when I was in places like Warsaw, is that it's not a NATO member. The Budapest agreement that was signed, which said we'll provide security assurances, seems to have not been worth the paper it was written on. And so I think the Ukrainians will do their best to defend and protect their own national sovereignty. But my guess is that the West, whether it is Europe or NATO or the United States, will do very little in the way of military action. And I think that's an enormous mistake to allow this continued movement towards the river, towards Kiev, without any response.
Okay, so do you think that you get the sense in talking to the Ukrainian officials that they will fight if the Russians move the tanks in? Did the Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian military fight Russians?
Absolutely. I think they're completely prepared to do so. I think they are completely outgunned and don't have the assets, the resources to really perform that defense in any significant way. So I think this is the challenge. But I think the Ukrainian people are deeply proud of their country. They want to protect, just like you and I would, our families, our homeland, the city, the communities that we've lived in. And so I do think that they will respond. They're preparing defenses today, but they'll be woefully inadequate to fight what is a former superpower with the weaponry and systems that the Russians have.
Okay, one of the things that the Ukrainians have asked the United States and the West is military equipment, military assistance, logistics, intelligence, communications, that sort of stuff. What we've given them is none of that, but we've given them some meals ready to eat,
Right.
So here's some rations, here's some care packages, here's a little food, but you're on your own.
Yeah. It took us weeks to deliver a couple 100,000 meals ready to eat. The things that America has, we could provide them to start without putting any Americans at risk.
Yeah, nobody's talking about American troops on the ground.
Nobody's thinking about that today. Having said that, I'd love to see another care group move that direction. I'd love to see lots of things which demonstrate American commitment without any real risk to U.S. servicemen and women. But intelligence sharing, basic ideas about how to prepare defenses, all the advice and training that we could provide to them, we're simply not doing that today.
Okay, well then let's play this thing out. The Russian troops move across the border. They occupy parts of eastern Ukraine. The Ukrainian elections are in 6 weeks, 5 weeks.
Correct, the end of May.
So then what happens who do the Ukrainians vote for? And then what happens next? If Putin is not happy with what he's got, does he keep going to other countries?
Well, it is a little bit different when you have a NATO commitment, and we've done a little bit in Poland now. We've moved some F-16s there, so we're starting to take some of the basic steps, albeit far too late. If recent history is any evidence, Vladimir Putin can move just about as far as he wants, and the American response will be next to nil. Remember, he's already taken 20% of the Ukrainian real estate in the Crimea. Right, a fifth of that nation is now in the hands of Russia, and the Western response has been to say, darn, that's too bad.
Just don't do anything more.
Don't do anything more. It won't surprise me that if he continues to move, our response won't look too terribly different from that.
Okay, now you've talked about Russian troops on the northern part of the Ukrainian border, not just the east, but the north. If you go north of that, you get the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They are NATO members.
You bet.
Now, Putin has told, he told former Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili in 2008, he said, I ultimately want to get those Baltic states back into Russia. So what happens if it keeps going? What happens if the Russian troops then move north and they're on the Estonian border? Does Putin send in the tanks? Does he need to send in the tanks? Does he do something like a provocative action that wouldn't trigger any NATO response, but would give him what he wants, which is political domination?
So you raised exactly the right issue. I believe Vladimir Putin is completely aimed at a single objective, that is to recreate as much of the former Soviet Union as he possibly can. In some cases, he'll do that by force, as we saw in the Ukraine. In other cases, he'll do it in a different way. He'll rig elections, he'll send in agents, he'll exert control, both financial, economic, as well as military pressure, to go assert control in much the way that he had done in Finland and places during the times not too distant past. The Cold War seems like a long time ago, but for our kids, KT, that was before their time, but it was in our lives.
Yeah.
This is the risk that is presented today, and a much more robust American response and Western European response is demanded to prevent exactly what it is you just walked through as the next sequence of events.
Does America rally around its NATO members if they are attacked? We have a treaty. We're supposed to. Do we? I think we will. I think what it will require, however, is leadership. Right? What's missing in all of these, we talk about America being war-weary. Your daughter's in the Navy. I was in the military. Americans always are reluctant to put their kids in harm's way. But when leaders identify true American national interest and our interests in Europe, I could go on for an awfully long time. When leaders identify true American national interests, Americans rally. And I think in that sense, Europeans and NATO will rally too. But we need our leader in the White House to tell the American people why this matters and to articulate his vision for how to protect these enormously important American national interests. Well said. Sounds like a leader, a guy who went to West Point. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Congressman Mike Pompeo recently returned from Poland and Ukraine, and he's also a member of the House Intelligence Committee in Washington. And that's it for Defcon 3. Thanks for joining us.